Hey everybody, so to continue from my last video, none of this is financial advice. Please do your own research. Everything I've ever said, anything I will continue to say is my humble opinion, and it should be considered a joke at best, okay? My views are constantly wrong and ever changing. So with that being said, I was talking about APEC and how I felt like investors in the Hang Seng and Chinese stocks were generally ahead of time because they had to build conviction through research. And so a lot of people like me bought into the Hang Seng, during the lows, and they've done really, really well over this time. I was saying in my last video that I think that Trump and Xi Jinping have probably been talking for years now. It doesn't matter if Trump is the current president or not. They've probably been negotiating deals for a very long time. Business elites and political elites generally have a different view on how the world is than the populace. The general populace has to burden themselves with the economic and social reforms and structural changes as the global development occurs. So you can blame other countries or foreign boogeymen and divide each other through things like identity politics, social dynamics, or intersectionality. So you can alleviate strain that would be used otherwise towards the political and business elites, and you can direct it on each other, like divide and conquer. So when it comes to things like APEC, I think that the United States and China have already made deals. They've negotiated every day, in my opinion, since they both became countries. Okay, but the specific trade deals between the United States and China generally focuses on things like from phase one, or just things like that are coming from tariffs. But how I would look at it is that the world is developing in a certain way, and there's just no ifs and buts about how this development is happening. We're heading north, and there might be hiccups along the ways, but we're heading this way because of things like international frameworks, trade deals, nuclear weapons to keep everybody in check, mutually assured destruction, the inability to contain economic or social or other types of crises in a world that's become more interconnected than ever. So it's almost impossible to become an isolationist, especially depending on the size and the prominence of your country. So the United States and China, when you look at them from an outside point of view, they're like best friends. Okay, if you just look at the data. And so when it comes to their trade, it really depends on how you look at it, but I think, in my humble opinion, that a lot of the political saber rattling is more for the general populace, as business and political elites make deals backdoor. So China dangles a $1 trillion investment bid to reset U.S. trade policies. So this is actually what Donald Trump has wanted, right? So if you look at Japan in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the United States and China today, there's a lot of similarities, right? Now I know the Plaza Accord occurred back then, and maybe you can't do that, but you can have a situation where Western countries, instead of devaluing a currency or forcing Japan to strengthen their currency to reduce their exports, you can do many creative things instead. So if the United States wanted to invest, or if the United States wanted to make a trade deal with China and become more interconnected, and China probably wants the same to have access to Western markets, what you can do instead is, let's see. Oops. Okay, so let's just take a look at the size of these countries, okay? So this is Japan right here. The population's around 124 million, and then China is like 1.3 billion, okay? Even if the population is much bigger in China than Japan, you have to look at things like the purchasing power of each individual, the amount of exports by volume, or by maybe GDP, or just value in general, or the types of exports that are coming from each country and import. So China has a large demand side, but it's not like their exports are as much as their demand side, okay? Because even if China has 1.3 billion, they're not exporting like 1.3 billion electric vehicles per year. That's just one example. Maybe the production of like electric vehicles is much smaller in proportion to their 1.3 billion, while Japan's automotive exports are much more prominent in comparison to their population. So maybe like I don't know. I don't really think I can use an example right now, but this can be wrong numbers. But let's just say Japan exports 30% of its vehicles in proportion to its individual overall population, while China does 10%. Okay, so maybe the overall amount of vehicles are kind of the same, but yeah, it's just in proportion to like the general size of their country. So overall, when you look at the way the the global economy is, there's a lot of demand, right? All of this is demand side. All these individuals want goods and services. So, when you integrate large countries like China, and then you start having other countries emerge in like Vietnam, for example, or you have other countries like Malaysia or the Philippines, and all these other countries that have been like previously colonized, or maybe they're third world countries or second world countries, start moving up the value ladder. Yeah, I mean the economic ladder, or all these countries. The United States has to make structural and economic reforms to handle that. So every time another country develops and becomes a first world country, it just means, oh, I guess I was wrong on where Vietnam was. It just means that you have to increase the pyramid in a sense, right? So you need to start you need to start bringing second and third world countries up as more countries move from like second to first. So in my opinion, a lot of the tensions between China and the United States, it may seem the Western media will generally say it's things like, oh, it's because of Taiwan, oh, it's because of democracy, oh, it's because of they do certain things that we don't find appropriate. But honestly, a lot of this, in my opinion, has been China has been offshoring a lot of its production because it's more cost efficient anyway. They've been developing the Belt and Road Initiative as well. They've been trying to develop other countries around itself to have a more efficient supply chain, which in turn helps everyone else at the same time. So a lot of the times when it comes to the United States and China tensions, a lot of people like to allude to wars or proxy wars and things like that. And yeah, these things do happen. I agree, but I don't really like to focus on that too much generally because with the way the world is heading, did a lot of these things have to happen anyway? Because yeah, if the Belt and Road is being developed in China from China, and you just have more economic efficiency, it can really help the entire world overall. Like, it just increases the pie in a sense. So yes, the United States had these large advantages post World War II, the Bank of International Settlements, and just the way the central banks were set up. It really allowed the United States to do really well. I don't really want to get into like colonialism or like neocolonialism and stuff like that, but yeah, basically how things have been structured since World War II, where there's developing countries that maybe they're in a position of to be exploited. Things like the Belt and Road Initiative, or just a global developing economy and more countries moving up from second to first or third to second, just allows for more global prosperity in a sense. So this would mean that more countries are competing in exports and imports in places that the United States has generally benefited from. So you can have things like the BIS, for example, or you can have central banking systems that the United States dominates, or you can have things like the petrodollar that allowed for these economic changes and growth to happen while the United States benefits, as like not really as a parasitic type of way, but I guess some could view it that way. I don't really want to get too like that, but yeah. But the United States is losing that dominance, which is, I think, I gotta be honest with you, I would assume that, the world leaders after World War II understood, like, the United States can't have this hegemony forever, So I dare say that a lot of the ways that the world is developing today, despite all the saber rattling or like the tensions, it was a natural occurrence that was always going to happen no matter what. And everyone already all the political leaders and business leaders probably already knew this. And the way it's sensationalized or dramatized into being the story, I think it gives us kind of an inaccurate view of how things could be heading, how and why things developed the way that they did. But I guess my point is that it really, depending on how we look at things, can really shape how we view global developments, for example. I mean, even of Taiwan, like just specifically Taiwan, when you look at the trade deals between the United States, China, right? There's a lot of news that says, oh, Taiwan might be up for sale. But if you look at the One China policy, which is respected by pretty much every country, even the United States, it could just be that it's beneficial to have Taiwan in a position of precarity, in a sense, and ambiguity, because you can use Taiwan as some sort of like autonomous region of China that benefits the United States and China, because like maybe Taiwan owns, maybe the PRC doesn't want to pay off like some bonds from like the Chinese Civil War, for example, that built like the Hukuang Rail, I think it was. Well, if it was under the ROC at the time when those bonds were taken out, I'm not too certain. I think this was during the Qing Dynasty. I don't know for sure. But let's just say the ROC had a lot of debts that it issued to like Western countries and other countries as well. If Taiwan doesn't want to, if the Chinese won and they took over all of China, and so they took over Taiwan too, right? And so like Taiwan is part of China. Let's just say, okay, if the mainland China doesn't want to take on those debts that are owed, I understand that some people say that the debts or those bonds are owed to them still, and some people say that the bonds were erased, right? They were written off. But to have Taiwan in a position that is in sort of like Hong Kong, but not really, where Taiwan and the ROC sort of pay off those bonds from a long time ago, which should be kind of done by now, accounting for inflation, accounting for interest, and accounting for other things. It kind of should be done around this time. But I mean, another thing to consider too, though, is that China did and has done for decades since opening up, it has produced a lot of value. So like in that sense, hasn't China already paid those things off a long time ago? And then how far do you want to go back, right? Do you want to consider like reparations from the Opium Wars, or like do you want to start considering reparations from like unfair trade deals that were made in the 1800s and things like that? Do you want to start considering like Western imperialism and colonialism, or Japan imperialism on China? So it can keep going long time ago, right? So like, Yeah, do you really? It really depends on how you want to look at the debts owed. But yeah, Taiwan's in a position that it invests a lot of its capital and resources into China, mainland China, and vice versa. These three countries do a lot of trade with each other. Taiwan can stimulate the United States economy by buying like weapons, goods, and services, which stimulates the United States economy. So China, even if Taiwan never uses those military arsenals for anything, you can use that demand from Taiwan for United States military weapons as almost like a jobs guarantee program for the United States, right? So the United States can force other countries or like suggest or encourage countries to buy weapons to help stimulate the United States economy, and China could be using Taiwan as a proxy for that. So there's a lot of benefits to the status quo on things for all three of these countries. Like some people will look at this like a military containment project, which it could be, but in the case of a real war, I don't see countries like South Korea, Japan, or Taiwan fighting China. Okay, because I think if the United States caused problems towards China and then they tried to force any country to fight China, especially like Japan, South Korea, or Philippines, or Taiwan, I think they would all team up with China and fight the United States first. And I think like the Grand Chessboard by Zabrinsky or whatever his name, or Zabigny or whatever, I think yeah, his fear was like a Pan-Asianism sort of thing or whatever. So yeah, I really doubt that any country that the United States sells weapons to along Asia are really going to be loyal to the United States and fight on the United States behalf of their geopolitical and economic interests. So some people believe that the United States and China are going to go into some kind of war. I don't see it ever happening. It just doesn't make any sense, and I don't think anybody wants it. I think it'll just, you might as well say goodbye to the entire world at that point. And I don't think any country is going to be willing to take on that battle. So yeah, you can arm the Pacific, but I don't think any of these countries in Asia are going to fight China. I think they're all going to fight the United States before they fight each other. And, to assume that Taiwan, Philippines, South Korea, or Japan would ever fight China, especially in a world with nuclear weapons, on behalf of the United States is ridiculous. I mean, whose Kool-Aid are you drinking? I just have to ask that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you'd have to assume that all these people are really dumb and that they have no brain. This makes no sense. So Western media, and I'm sure Chinese media does too, love to frame things in a way to justify how things are turning out. But rather than say, Western media will say, we're arming Taiwan because we're protecting them, we're protecting democracy. They don't say Taiwan is part of China, and we don't owe. So Taiwan is part of China, but the United States really needs economic stimulus, and China will supply rare earth metals, for example, and production capacity and things like that. And rather than just give us money outright, which won't help us develop at all, they'll help us stimulate our economy by using Taiwan as a proxy to buy our weapons, to stimulate our economy, to give us a jobs guarantee program, research and development. And then the United States will buy and invest in Taiwan for its chips, and then Taiwan will sell chips and manufacturing and capital resource and invest them into China and the United States. And Taiwan will buy bonds from the United States. In a sense, so instead of China might sell some of its bonds to de-risk or to use that towards other things that they want to by selling off its bonds. Maybe it wants to invest more in its own selves or other countries, or pay off debts in other areas, or help finance in other areas. But maybe Taiwan will buy debts instead, and they'll use Taiwan, or maybe Taiwan will pay off some things from the Hukuang railroad bonds or whatever. When I look at all three of these countries, China, Taiwan, and the United States, Taiwan is part of China, depending on who you ask, right? But Anyway, so that's three different areas. Like they're all, or three different economies. There we go. They're all like really good friends, and there's just until someone actually shoots somebody, then I'm gonna still continue to think that they're best friends and that most of it is just marketing, right? I mean, if you even look at the AI bubble, right? They'll say, "Oh man, like the AI bubble is justified to have these high values because of XYZ reason. Like it's the future, it's the tech, it's creating all these jobs, blah blah blah." Like you need reasons to justify why things are the way that they are, because when you start actually understanding the mechanics behind it, you might start questioning why it is the way that it is, and that can lead towards changes that nobody in a political or business elite sense may want until they want it to change, because everything has a purpose the way it is now. Because what if all these countries became friendly, right? Let's just say the whole world became friendly tomorrow. Well, the United States has a lot of its economy, because it's been gutted from its manufacturing, right? Its low-end manufacturing. A lot of it, the United States, is research and development and high technological goods like weapons, electronics, some vehicles, things like that, some infrastructure. So, if the whole world became peaceful tomorrow, then who you would cause economic devastation to the United States, because there's a lot of the economy depends on military spending. So like you could kind of look at the whole military industrial complex or the whole military economy in the United States as like a modified version of a jobs guaranteed program. And so if you want these reforms to happen over time, they probably will, but it can't happen overnight. So even when you look at the internal combustion engine and electric vehicle industry, it's easy for a country like China, or much easier to that is starting from a position that is much more flexible and not as developed, to move from like to leapfrog internal combustion engine and go straight into electric vehicles. But it's not easy for a country like the United States that relies heavily on oil infrastructure and internal combustion infrastructure and supply chains that depend heavily on that. You can't expect a country like that to immediately move towards electric vehicles. Similar, you can't expect them to go from like a fossil fuel country into like a green energy economy. You can't expect them to demilitarize, even if the world became more peaceful, because it acts like a stimulus for the economy. And just the way that the economy is structured, you kind of have to wait for things to occur. So it's not easy to crash or change the way the economy is currently. It just takes a long time, and you'll see this probably over time as certain demographics die off and newer generations form. You can control the demographics and population count and change the economic and political structures to accommodate a more friendly and peaceful world, along with changing the way your financial markets are structured, or your economic structures, or your job and labor structures as well, to accommodate all these types of things that honor the UN Charter and Paris Agreement, for example. So when it comes to APEC, I think that I could be delusional, but APEC, Taiwan, United States, and China, a lot of these things are more symbolic than anything else. And so maybe when we see a country like, depending on how trade deals are made, it could be to more all the things from APEC can be more so for like the populace and Wall Street and investor sentiment and human sentiment, rather than like how political and business elites think. So